What makes us fall in love? Why are people violent? Is depth perception innate or learned? How do we form prejudices against others? These are all questions psychologists have asked and answered with experiments. Psychologists who want to know the causes of specific behaviors use experiments because the experiment is the only psychological research method that allows the experimenter to draw conclusions about cause and effect. Like other research methods, an experiment begins with a hypothesis or testable prediction. The hypothesis states a relationship between two variables. A variable is anything that can change in amount or quality. Suppose your psychology professor wants to know if daily online quizzes will improve her students' learning of key psychology concepts. She might form a hypothesis stating, if college students take daily online quizzes, then their understanding of psychology concepts will be enhanced. The variables in this hypothesis are 1. Taking online quizzes, and 2. Students' understanding of psychology concepts. Experimenters want to test the effect of one variable on another. For this reason, an experimental hypothesis contains two types of variables, an independent variable and a dependent variable. The independent variable is one that the experimenter deliberately manipulates or changes. The experimenter selects this variable because he or she thinks that changing it will cause a change in behavior. The dependent variable is the behavior that is being measured, the outcome. In every controlled experiment, there is at least one independent and one dependent variable. In order to determine whether the independent variable actually does cause changes in the dependent variable, experimenters try to keep all other aspects of the experimental situation constant, allowing changes only in the independent variable. If you were to test the hypothesis that receiving email distracts students from studying, receiving email would be the independent variable, and distraction from studying would be the dependent variable. Students' level of distraction from studying depends on, or changes, in response to whether they receive email. Here are some examples of independent and dependent variables. In psychology, as in all science, researchers often want to repeat or replicate each other's findings to check their conclusions. To help other researchers do this, experimenters need to provide clear and precise definitions for the independent and dependent variables that they use. They create an operational definition of each variable, defining it in terms of how it is being measured. For example, suppose a researcher wanted to measure distraction from studying. Distraction could be operationally defined as the number of times studying was interrupted. Here are some examples of operational definitions. Suppose you want to study the attitudes of students at your university about a new way to register for classes. You would not be expected to study the entire student body at your college. Instead, you would study a subset, or a sample, of students and then generalize your results to the school's population as a whole. The sample must be similar to or representative of the population on key characteristics, such as gender, age, race, and cultural background. The best way to ensure representativeness is to use a random sample, that is, one in which each potential subject has an equal chance of being selected for the experiment. So, an experimenter might develop a computer program that randomly chooses 10% of the students who are listed in the college registration department's database. A representative sample of a population accurately reflects the characteristics of that population. In contrast, a biased sample is one that does not truly represent a whole population. If you want to know college students' attitudes about smoking in public places, and you only survey students walking in and out of a fitness center about their smoking habits and attitudes, you are sure to get biased responses. Generalizations made on biased samples lead to faulty conclusions. The simplest psychological experiment compares two groups of participants. One group is called the experimental group. The other is the control group. The experimental group and the control group are treated exactly alike, except for one condition, the independent variable, the key factor that the scientist is evaluating. A scientist with two groups of participants would define two levels of the independent variable, one for each group. These are known as the treatments. Participants in the control group will receive a constant, sometimes zero, amount of the treatment. Those in the experimental group will receive a level of the treatment that the scientist believes will change the behavior being measured. Here are some examples of experimental and control groups. The key to a successful experiment is to keep all aspects of the experimental situation constant, except the different treatments for the experimental and control groups. If nothing changes but the independent variable, then measured differences in behavior between the experimental and control groups can be attributed to the independent variable. The scientist can then say with some certainty that a certain treatment or level of an independent variable caused a change in behavior. How do researchers decide whether a participant gets to be in the experimental group or the control group? Researchers want to avoid assigning participants to groups in any way that would allow individual characteristics of participants, such as gender, ethnic background, age, or socioeconomic group, to affect the results of an experiment. To balance personal characteristics between control and experimental groups, researchers rely on random assignment. Random assignment is the procedure of assigning subjects to the experimental or control condition in such a way that they have an equal chance of being put into either group. How is random assignment accomplished? Most researchers today rely on computer programs to help them with random assignment, but even something as simple as a coin toss would work. The inherent randomness in computer programs, or coin flipping, ensures that the experimental and control groups will have about the same number of males and females, people from different ethnic groups, and so on. Suppose you are testing memory of lists of words. You have 60 students participating in your study that you need to assign to either the experimental or control group. You also want to make sure that individuals in both groups have similar memory or word skills. Try assigning your participants to groups using a simple coin flip. Let's review the basic model of an experiment using a classic social psychology study as an illustration. Social psychologists are interested in the sources of aggression. According to psychologist Albert Bandura, people can learn new behavior, including aggressive behavior, by observing and modeling or imitating the behaviors of others. The power of models to elicit aggressive behavior was demonstrated in a classic experiment by Bandura and his associates in 1961 at Stanford University. These studies have come to be known as the Bobo doll studies. Albert Bandura's team of researchers hypothesized that children who observed adult models behaving aggressively would be more likely to imitate the adult and engage in similar aggressive behavior than children who were not exposed to the aggressive model. The independent variable in Bandura's Bobo doll study was whether or not a child observed a model behaving aggressively toward an inflatable clown doll called a Bobo doll. The dependent variable was the number of hits children directed at the Bobo doll after seeing a model interact with the doll. 36 boys and 36 girls from the Stanford University Nursery School participated in Bandura's first Bobo doll study. The average age of the children was 4 years and 4 months. These children were assigned to one of two groups. The experimental group observed an aggressive adult model, and the control group observed a non-aggressive model. A child in the experimental or aggressive model condition observed an adult repeatedly pummeling a Bobo doll, yelling out, "Sock him in the nose, throw him in the air, kick him, pow." After observing this display of aggression, the child was taken to another room that was filled with toys, but was told that the toys were for other children. Frustrated, the child was then taken to a third room that had toys and a Bobo doll. The child was left alone and observed. Children in the control group were treated in the same way, except the model they observed totally ignored the Bobo doll and instead assembled Tinker toys in a quiet manner. Bandura's landmark study using children and Bobo dolls demonstrated that aggression can be acquired through observational learning, without the models or children receiving any reinforcement for their aggressive behavior. Bandura found that children who observed an aggressive model engaged in more aggressive behavior than those who observed a non-aggressive model. Some children even copied the model and repeated what the model had said. These findings were influential in subsequent research on the role of television violence on children.